There it goes. Hi, everybody. I'm Jess Weber. I'm the Chief Talent and Development Officer of Creatively. Thank you all for joining us here today to discuss pivoting careers. We are so lucky and thrilled to have Diana Costescu with us today. She leads talent for Tapestry. And today, the two of us, we actually are coincidentally both career pivoters ourselves. So we're going to start off by introducing ourselves just to give you some context around who we are. And then we're going to give you some tips or advice to how to approach this journey for yourselves. And just a reminder that there is a Q&A button on the bottom. So if, as we are having this conversation, you have any questions you want us to address, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them either mid-conversation or towards the end when we have a Q&A. Okay, so as I mentioned, I am Jess Weber. I lead talent and development at Creatively. What does that mean? I get great brands like Tapestry to join Creatively so they can post jobs for you to apply to. I also help them recruit talent if they need some extra support. So prior to Creatively, I spent 8 years as a recruiter at a large search firm. I did not grow up thinking I was going to be a recruiter. I know neither did Diana. I actually started off in the agency world amongst, creatives like yourself. And then I pivoted client side and I led marketing for a retail company. And then I decided that wasn't what I wanted to do. So I went back to school and decided to pivot again and led strategy for a media company. And then maybe 6 or 7 years later, was looking for my next opportunity. And a recruiting firm said, how about joining us as a recruiter? I said, why would I want to do that? Realized it was the best career I never thought I wanted. And here I am. So that's my kind of bio and the cliff notes of my career pivot. Diana, would love for you to introduce yourselves and maybe share your story.
Thanks so much, Jess, and thank you to Creatively. My name is Diana Costescu, and I'm the Director of Talent Acquisition for Tapestry. Tapestry is the parent company of Coach Kate Spade and Stuart Weitzman. I've been with the organization 11 years. I started as a manager of recruitment, but like Jess mentioned, I was a career pivoter. I graduated FIT, and my first job out of school was working wholesale sales in a showroom. And through the use of recruiters, I pivoted into a product development career, followed by recruitment at an agency, and then went in-house with Coach at the time, which later became Tapestry.
Great. So another reminder about the Q&A button before we dive into this conversation. So Dana, I thought it would be helpful to take a step back. I think, both serendipitously kind of fell into our careers, right? But I think many people here today are maybe proactively thinking about career switching. Just what's your general advice, regardless of, how someone got there, to thinking about whether a career pivot is right and if they should take the plunge?
I think I'm a planner, and I think but I'm also a dreamer, and I encourage people to dream. Nothing is impossible, but it's about how badly do you want this change? Asking yourself all the right questions as you become more senior in your career. You're asked to be more strategic, and that means asking a lot of questions, and that should start with yourself as well. How willing are you to go back to school? That may be something you have to do. To intern or work part-time in addition to your current role. Are you prepared to possibly take a step back to potentially move forward? This includes, your salary, your compensation, and change in that. Are you willing to relocate so that you can cast a wider net in your outreach and connections? Thinking about what don't you want to do, but also why do you want this? Why do you think it will make your life better? There's a lot of soul searching involved. I think it's important to dig deep and just, make that pros and cons list and ask yourself if you're willing to make the investment that this pivot requires and what you're willing to sacrifice. I think all of that needs to be written down so that you can make a clear decision.
Yes, I'm a big fan of the pro cons list with bullets and
Yeah.
writing it down. And I'll also to add to that, also talk to people, right? I think we all have kind of our circle, like our inner circle, our advisors, mentors, and take that list to them and say, hey, like anything else you think I should think about, and kind of gut check and pressure test everything that has been goes on in your head or on the paper. So I guess the next phase, if you've decided, or once you've made that decision, or you're even in that thinking phase, how can you start presenting yourself to the world, recruiters, other companies as the, the next, right? You're in position A right now, you want to move to a new function or position B, especially in our world where so much of it is visual in nature.
Yeah, I think for a lot of us, we're starting from scratch. So you want to be able to build a solid foundation, be prepared, do your research, ask yourself, what are the 10 companies that I would want to work for? I think it's very important to be clear on what you want to be so that you can focus on whether it's a specialty or a category, or it could be multiple categories these days. What kind of roles am I interested in? Study job descriptions. I always think, people, I always advise that people look at job descriptions to see, what is it that stands out in the job description that I get excited about or I'm interested in. But being realistic, still thinking, the sky is the limit. What are those transferable skills that I have now versus what I need to learn? Is it feasible? What is the cost? Can I learn this on my own? There's so many resources out there right now. Or I need to go back to school? Can you get a degree, or would a certificate suffice? So many times it's not even about whether you currently have the skills, it's about the potential to gain them. That this won't necessarily land you your first role on the design team. It requires effort. Like, you need to be able to sell yourself authentically and meet the expectations of a job description if you're going for more of that traditional in-house corporate role.
Mm-hmm. If someone is already sitting within an organization, I think some kind of an maybe obvious or easy step is to talk to your colleagues too, especially if you're in an organization that embraces hiring from within. And if you're a UX designer and you want to pivot to art, being an art director, go talk to the art directors, right? And leverage that again, as long, sometimes that can, depending on the organization, you might not have that access, but that's also a great way for someone to take, I would say leap of faith, but let's say you don't necessarily want to go back to school yet, or you're not ready to, and you kind of want to test the waters. That's a great way. If even you talk to HR to say, hey, I'm thinking about this. Can I do some projects?
Yeah.
What do you agree with that? Because again, you live
Absolutely.
and breathe it at Tapestry.
Yeah, and you were mentioning before to reach out to people, ask questions, but it's so important to go beyond your network. My first manager taught me everything about that taught me everything about recruiting, told me once that every contact is valuable. And I've taken that throughout my career, and it's resonated a few times throughout. So, what's happening around you, attending events, seminars, spending time on LinkedIn and creatively. It's important to, like I said, go beyond your network, shadowing someone. If you're within an organization that has other opportunities you may be interested in, as you mentioned, UX to art direction, maybe ask to sit in on a meeting. What does someone's portfolio look like? What was their career progression? How did they start? Where did they go to school? Again, a lot of questions, but I think that curiosity builds that path that you need to be on in order to figure out, all right, what direction do I take?
Yeah, agreed. And I'm going to add to your list, every connection is valuable, and people like to talk about themselves, right?
Yes.
So oftentimes, right? So you reach out to someone and say, talk to me about your journey. More often than not, they're going to love to talk to you about their journey and be helpful. And so don't forget that. I think oftentimes when you're sitting on the other side of it, it might feel like a burden, but I've rarely had someone, if I've reached out in a very kind of just with no expectations of a job, just saying, hey, I'd love to learn more about how you got from point A to point B. It works, and a lot of people just don't ask, right?
Right, right. But you're right. People want to be heard as well. And especially now, I think when reconnecting with people and seeing people in person again, I think the idea of even mentorship or peer-to-peer or just I find a lot of value and for mentoring and being a mentee to be rewarding. And sometimes, you know, if you want to pivot, sometimes it is about finding that mentor in a certain space. When I mentioned attending events or seminars, it's those connections that you continue to build on. We have someone at Coach, and he is an SVP, super busy. People email him on LinkedIn about grabbing a coffee to learn about, you know, how he got to where he is, and he takes the time and he responds and he meets them for coffee. Some people are more generous with their time than others, but you know, when you show interest in them and acknowledge or validate something they're doing professionally, there is that interest in connecting, and just being of service. I think for me at least, I've responded to some messages as well, and it's really rewarding.
Yeah, I agree. And I also had things like, I know people helped me when I was going through that journey. And I feel like you always, hopefully you want to pay it forward.
Yes.
Lizzie, voice from above, I think you said there might have been a question from the group, if you want to chime in.
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm creatively C, but also Lizzie. And I'll be reading questions from the audience as they come in. So as Jess and Diana have encouraged you all, please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. But yes, we do have a great question from Janine. They asked, what has been your experience seeing candidates coming out of being self-employed or entrepreneurial? For example, she's had 15 years of doing so, pivoting back into an employee role. How can I best present myself in the job search? As I'm seemingly paradoxically overqualified and too specialized, yet not specialized enough, or have enough recent success with multiple other brands or companies.
I like that question because there's so much going through my mind right now. I like when people are self-employed, or they've been consultants, or they're founders and entrepreneurs. You get to wear so many hats and do so much. Going into a corporate role, and maybe you don't start with a multi-billion-dollar company, but you pivot into an organization where, you know, it may not be as overwhelming for you. When you get to wear so many different hats and go into an organization, it's a breath of fresh air to be able to focus on you know, one thing that you've touched upon as an entrepreneur. I think being able to stay concise and focused, like if you're looking to pivot, what is it that you've enjoyed as an entrepreneur? What can you bring to the table to the organization? Is it project management? Is it graphic design? Is it copy? Is it, you know, negotiation skills? I mean, there are so many roles that require that you know, you don't necessarily need a finance degree. Like, it's product development. It's about, again, the job descriptions are really helpful, but the research, I think it's knowing and being able to focus so that you don't come off as like, yes, I'm open to absolutely anything, but being concise and clear helps you be more strategic in your job search.
And one thing I'll add, I would say completely different side of this coin is oftentimes when I'm recruiting, the question will come up. This person is always always been a freelancer. How do they know they're going to stay? Like, they're going to stay with us, right? Because I think, Dan, we both know, like, it's a lot of time and effort to find the perfect person. So if you freelanced, you know, for like 10, 15 years, and not everyone always understands what that means. Like, if you've had an 8-month job, it's not because you're not committed, the job was 8 months, right? So I think when you're communicating to that organization, it's why this is the one, or why is it the time? Like just having your knowing that's probably one of the questions someone might have if they don't hire a lot of freelancers or they don't convert freelancers to full-time often, that you should answer that question for them, right? This is why I want to do this now, and this is why I want to do it for you, right? And really just be authentic and passionate, because that's, again, a question I get all the time. I would say not only from freelancers pivoting to full-time, but folks who are in an agency world and want to go in-house. It's kind of a similar, I think, question mark. Some, not all, I don't want to discourage anyone. It's just, it's a question, right? Why now? And why this person?
Yeah, and so many times it's by choice that people are freelancers. It can be
Right.
very lucrative. You can manage your own time. You get exposure to so many different organizations, and you become much more well-rounded, I think.
No, totally agree. And I think that, like, I think also just based on where you sit and the type of creators you hire, like that, we don't have to convince you, right? But some organizations, they might have a different perspective. Lizzie, were you chiming in again? Sorry, we're clearly
Oh, no worries. I was just
a
saying
dynamic conversation here.
No, I was just saying thank you. I thought that was
Oh.
such a great answer to the question. I see Ed in the chat also related very much so. So please keep the questions coming, guys. Thank you.
So Jen, something I wanted to ask you kind of, as a maybe segue. So when someone is reaching out or applying to a job as a career pivoter, like what will help them stand out, whether it's, you know, that email or the job application, recognizing all of the context that we've just talked about?
Well, we've all heard the saying, less is more, because if recruiters and, you know, professionals on LinkedIn creatively, seeing what platforms are out there and the best ones to make those connections. However you reach out, it's important to keep it concise, energetic, and accessible. And what I mean by that is your contact details. If you're going to send a portfolio, which, by the way, I recommend people have websites now. You just send a link and it's easy. Make sure your links are working. Your site is not password protected. Keeping it easy for the person you're reaching out to so they can access you as easily as possible. I had someone reach out to me recently, and it was just a short note. I'm currently a student in FIT. At FIT, that's where I went to school. So right away, I felt like this emotional connection to her. She's a freshman. She told me she was applying to one of our internships. I do not work on the internship program, but you know, the outreach was so authentic. Like she said, I'm passionate about Coach's branding. I'm a huge art direction fanatic. It'd be great to hear from you. And she heard from me, and we've been talking since February. I think we check in once a month. So just a simple, concise note for me really stands out, and access to the person's profile.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think short, and I know I often, and my screen's blurred, but like I'm often reading emails on my phone, right? So just getting to the heart of, you know, why you're reaching out, why this particular role or brand or me in particular is someone you want to talk to, is, I think, is just effective in the world that we're living in. And they don't need the background and the story yet, right, of your career pivot. And that's the conversation for coffee or Zoom, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then kind of hand in hand with that, you talked about like the links to a portfolio or someone's work. In addition to, is there a way that, again, a pivoter who might not have as full of a portfolio as someone who's been doing that for the same function for, I don't know, 5-10 years, can present their work in a way that would also grab your attention?
Absolutely. And for those pivoters that, you know, don't even know where to start, like let's say you don't know what, let's go with a footwear designer. you're passionate, people are sneakerheads, or they're looking at brands that are doing so many collaborations with sneakers. Or you want to move into that kind of role. Job description, like just take a look at the skills that are needed and be realistic. Maybe you're not going to come in as a design director. Like what is realistic? If you're just getting the foundations, what are those software skills you need? Do you need to be the best hand sketcher? We like that, but these days we're seeing more and more ways of presenting your work so that your aesthetic comes across. You can prove that you have a great taste level or an affinity for the brands that you're applying for. So see what kind of skills you need, and check those off. And there are so many different resources out there where you can either learn it on your own or take a crash course or an accelerator program. But social media, there's definitely ways to present yourself when you want to put yourself out there for recruiters to see, or different organizations. You can look up, pattern making classes, or take a weekend course on shoemaking, or whatever it is that you want to pivot into. I have found creatives on some of the platforms, including Instagram and Creatively. Perhaps I can share some examples of one particular creative that I did find, who I then learned after reaching out to him on Instagram that he was a career pivoter. He was not a footwear designer. And I wanted to share right here. I was on Instagram one day and I was just looking at hashtags for sneakers and sneakerheads. And here is this profile. And I was just so interested. Like, he had some sketches, and, a lot of his personality came through in his profile. And I just messaged him, and I learned that he had gone to an academy for footwear design. He came from a different background, and I do believe it was industrial design. And he wanted to take some of the software skills that he had and pivot into more of a fashion career. So this is just his way of expressing his work. And, this is now some of the collaborations that he's done, which is super impressive. But it's a good way to find talent. Hashtag your work, put yourself out there. It doesn't have to be all like hand sketching and mood boards. It can be literally a feeling of who you are and what your aesthetic gravitates towards.
Diana, I was just going to interrupt you for a question there, because I think sometimes I've heard this question before about Instagram, and should I have a personal profile and a professional profile? And you just touched upon like one of the reasons this profile really spoke to you on Instagram was that the personality came through. So what's your stance on kind of the blending of the two, especially in the context of a career switcher, where kind of like their personality and who they are might be really important in your decision making?
Absolutely. I think it's important to keep it clean and professional. Definitely. I mean, you can have your separate account, but when I think about our brands and this, we're not a sportswear brand, we're not a sneaker brand, but we certainly have these customers. Our three brands are accessible. They're a contemplated purchase, like some of these sneakers are, but they're attainable. This shows community. It shows, a crafty kind of background, and a different range. So there's feminine, there's fashion, there's designer, there's sportswear. So a good designer can design into any aesthetic and any brand, in my opinion. And I felt like, even though the majority of this was sneakers, we introduced him to one of our brands, and I can't, speak too much of it, but there were conversations, and, obviously a great talent and good designers. I do feel like if you have amazing hand sketching, great, but we also, one of our coach designers here, this is her Instagram, she doesn't have any sketches, and she shows, the product that she plays with, the accessories, she hand paints a lot of this stuff. There's some personality here too, and some concept, and it's okay to get, a little personal and humorous. And so I think it's nice for that style to come across, and a bit of your personality to shine through on social media. Our very own Creatively, who we found, she is now an apprentice with us. Her profile on Creatively was so impressive. And, it didn't scream accessory design or fashion design, but we, fortunately, she had the appropriate hashtags, a little bit of her personality coming out too, and just her personal interests. And the boards are great. Like, here are some product shots, and here are pieces that, she put together, and some student work, and, all of the things that she's interested in. And these are so fun and not traditionally what we look for, but a very unique and innovative approach to an actual portfolio design. And then
I have
oh, go ahead.
I was like, I have a question. I don't know if anyone else has it in terms of hashtags, because obviously it's going to be different for every discipline and every job, but is there any kind of just general advice on hashtags and tips that you think will help people kind of stand out and like rise to the top of the search results?
Absolutely. I think when I found this designer, I went into an Instagram hole just for hours, looking at his hashtags and who he was tagging and how important. And that's what I love about Creatively too, like just who you can access through looking at designers that you're gravitating to, or who you're interested in, or, it may not even be from an image that is obviously for product design. It could be a campaign, and then you look at that tag and who was the photographer on that. Like, you could really get in a labyrinth, like a timeless labyrinth on Instagram. And I make my folders, as you've seen, and I save people who are content creators, social media, copywriters, footwear designers. Here's someone who, she's a print designer, and I found her through Instagram, and, she worked with us at one of our brands. But I think over tagging is not a bad thing. So, pattern designers. So looking at what others are doing that maybe have a large following, or are verified Instagrammers that you admire, see like what they're using in their tags that is relevant to the career path that you're looking to go into.
And it comes back to your kind of one of your first points about your contacts and your network, and not only just leveraging them for advice, but also in terms of your kind of social ecosystem, because it might just help you connect with the right recruiter and right brands.
Yes, and you'll find that the world is so small. You start connecting to people, and I don't know, it falls into place at some point, but it's about putting yourself out there and saying yes to temp positions, to freelance roles. That's also a great way to segue into an organization that you're interested in. And then if you do the work well, it can be a game changer and open other doors.
Mm-hmm. Any other, just I'm thinking of tips, maybe more general tips about pivoting careers that you think will be helpful besides what we've touched on thus far, and before we pivot to Q&A?
I think I've covered, well, I've how close can you get to the actual role or person in a role that you're interested in? Do your homework. LinkedIn is a great platform to see, you know, who that second degree of connection is, and you know, where did you go to school, or who do you know that you went to school with, and where are they working? Being of service, putting yourself out there. Also, I think pro bono work, or just volunteer work. You know, if you want to be a graphic designer, maybe it's doing work for the local boutique or restaurant, just so you can build upon your skills and portfolio. If you work in retail, and you know, you have a knack for storytelling, can that segue into a social media role? Like, what's the synergy? If you're a lawyer, you know, can that pivot into a copy role? Because you know, you have great writing skills. So each role along your career path gives you the opportunity to really look elsewhere, look at those you admire. How did they get started? Careers are not always linear, especially in creative. So I think it's really important to build and connect.
Yeah, I love your suggestion about volunteer work. A question I think that Lizzie had mentioned earlier was around like fake work, right? Where you're doing a project, like even though you haven't connected with a brand, and you put it on your portfolio. And I think from my perspective on it is you got to explain your narrative a little bit, because if you just see work that you're just doing personally without understanding the why, again, this comes back to, you can tell I'm the skeptical recruiter. The questions, well, are they unemployed? Why are they doing this? Did they did they do something before? So I think having a mix is great, and also making sure it's understood that the why behind that is clear, so that especially if there's, you know, a resume or background, a recruiter or someone receiving it will kind of understand the impetus for it. Because do you agree, or do you have a different perspective on that?
Absolutely. I think it's important to always be transparent. You know, if you're interviewing with the specific company, it doesn't hurt to, if you're going into a creative field, designing something specific to the brand that you're interviewing for, but being clear, like, this is something I just did on my own. This is personal work, or a project that I did for an interview. Again, the research is super important. Look up the company, the website, you know, what is their aesthetic? Visit, if they're a retailer, go visit the store, talk to the employees, see how they're selling the brand. The more informed you are, the more confident you'll feel when you are speaking to recruiters or putting yourself out there, I think.
Okay, I think we're pivoting to some questions, or at least Lizzie, I'm reading this down through both. How do you feel about maybe taking like an internship, or you know, if you have a full-time job, like how do you balance, you know, doing, you know, this additional work that, you know, you may not necessarily be getting paid for, and how do you weigh that?
Yeah. Well, we have had experience of people that have pivoted into more of those entry-level opportunities, and even before entry level, it's at the internship phase. Again, it's something you have to evaluate for yourself, and you know, everyone's situation is different. It depends. You have to think about the costs and factor that in. Can you intern and maybe work evenings or at night? Like, it's about how badly you
want it.
You really want it, because unfortunately, well, I don't know how many people on the panel are in New York, but you know, people hustle here, and maybe it's about relocating to a city where there are more opportunities in the field that you're interested in. But these days, actually, with the flexibility of remote, I think just putting yourself out there in general is helpful, but you may have to take that step back. And we have hired people that are, you know, 8 years out of school, 6 to 8 years out of school, into internships because they haven't gotten a foot in the door in the corporate world, and very passionate about moving into a design role. So it does happen.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I was going to say, Lizzie, as you might see, I'm leaning over even with my reading glasses. So I asked Lizzie to tee up the question so I'm not straining my eyes to read the chat. So thank you.
No worries. We have a couple questions, but if anyone has any others, we certainly welcome them, as we'd love to hear from you. But we had a question, I think that kind of touches on ageism. How I know that that's especially in startup world, Silicon Valley, that seems to be a big challenge that is kind of silently brewing over in that world. How would you say people can market themselves best to really combat that misconception that just because you're older means that you aren't as marketable for a job?
I mean, I don't personally as a recruiter, like if you're qualified and you're the right person for the job, you're the right person for the job, right? And I think it's, some of it is really contextual, right? Like if you have if you have been working in print your entire career and it's a digital role, like you might not have the qualifications, and that has nothing to do with your years of experience. It's more of a function, like it's something you would need to learn. But on the flip side, you would have the leadership, the strategy, like all the other things you need. So I think every situation is different, but if I don't care, like I don't necessarily care, where someone is in their journey if they're qualified job. I know that might be the exception to the rule. I'm like, Dan, I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, when I look at profiles that with, over 20 years, 25 years of experience, I often see resumes that list all of, all of the things that they've accomplished at each organization. And I think when you get to a certain point in your career, recruiters, I think what's the rate? We look at a resume for under, I don't know, maybe 90 seconds, is it? Like, at least I've been doing this over 15 years. So I can look at a resume. Of course, I'll review it well. But like, I can tell if someone, if we should connect with them based on how concise they are. And just like, it's not necessary to put everything down that you've accomplished. You can show your career progression. And as we get closer to the current year, it's, maybe you put like those 5 or 6 or 6 bullets and be a little bit more detailed in the descriptions. But oftentimes I do find like that the ageism thing, I understand that people may feel like they're not being considered because they're overqualified. I happen to think that, that's, you need that diversity of experience at an organization. And it's about how clear you are in what you're applying for, versus, just, you have a breadth of experience, so you want to be able to apply multiple roles. So I think it's just a matter of being very intentional and thoughtful about what it is you're applying for.
And how you position yourself, like
question, right? Like, it's like, what are we?
Well, I was going to say too, it's like, it just, I mean, I hate to say it really, it depends, right? Because I think we're also in a world where being a multi-hyphenate is beneficial. Like, as I age myself, when I started, I think, we used to look, I think, at talent in a very siloed way. Like, you're a marketer, or you are an engineer and a tech person, you are a creative. And just because of the world we're living in, and the need to collaborate and move quickly, having someone who understands the other functions and can collaborate with them, because maybe they were in that role before, maybe they were, like, I always see that as added value. So looping this back to the question, I think just positioning yourself someone who can connect those dots and brings that experience to the table, it's that the experience is beneficial. So I think it all comes back to the narrative, and it's all a marketing exercise, right? In some way, how do you get the job? How do you stand out? it's maybe flipping that around, and right, how do you sell yourself? How do you make your years of experience a benefit instead of, something that might, potentially rule you out?
Right. And what is it that you're the most passionate about from what you have done, so that you could hone in a bit more and stay the course and focused? Because I also look at people that are, that have a breadth of experience, and sometimes I think, oh, they'd be a great recruiter because
Yes.
so many aspects of
Right.
an organization or the life cycle of a brand. So I often think they would make great recruiters.
Yes, Diana and I will both, if anyone wants to talk about pivoting to recruiting, we're happy to have a whole nother conversation about that. But you totally agree.
Thanks, ladies. Another question we have is, how do you think people that are self-taught or don't have formal education in the career they want to pivot should present themselves when applying to jobs or talking to recruiters? So for example, if they maybe have an associate's versus a bachelor's, or if they, learned,
like
YouTube and Creatively classes are just so.
We're both saying no. Yeah. I don't think, I will say, like, I don't think it matters, right? There's some, again, as I go, I'm like back, companies used to, or very few companies used to have requirements around that, like must have bachelor's degree or must have, like, but I think today that's just one that's just gone by the wayside for many reasons. But yeah, I don't think it's an issue. Diana, what about?
It's not an issue anymore.
Right.
Actually, having a point of view. I mean, our head of design at one of our brands did not go to a fashion design school. It's not necessary. We're not requiring bachelors for a lot of creative roles, because it's, we don't know where your experience has landed you, or the career path that you have been on would bring a diversity of experience to us. And these days, I think it's great to have a traditional education in design. Of course, that never hurts, but we've also had a lot of success hiring people that don't necessarily have that traditional education, but self-taught as well. I mean, I have a great example for someone who worked in retail for 15 years in a menswear store, and they had sewers downstairs, and you got fitted, and he fitted people all day long. And he realized that, I love the pace of this, but I actually really like working with the product. Started paying someone on the side to get tutored on pattern making, and put himself out there in terms of freelance work, worked a day a week at an organization while he kept his full-time job. So you don't necessarily have to put yourself out there 5 days a week. It can be 1 or 2 days somewhere. And maybe you're not getting paid. Maybe you get paid in product. Maybe it's with a startup, but that opens doors. And, he worked 6 days a week, and all of a sudden he learned about fitting a bit more internally, and he's a tech designer now. So those stories do happen. And
I love that story, because to me, as I'm listening to this, I'm like, I want to hire that person, because that shows passion and commitment and hustle. Sure. And then you wanted this so much, you went after it. So yeah. And I think I'm just listening as I'm like connecting, as a former strategy person before I became a recruiter, just connecting the dots through many of these questions, like thinking about school, freelance, kind of, I would say these, not labels, but I say throw it all out the window, right? Doesn't matter what the job description says. Even if it says requires a bachelor's degree, it's like you're still going after it because you want it. And I think a lot of these are just perceptions that we all have, that if you're the right person, as Diana just shared, if you're the right person for the job and you can connect with someone and you have great work and you're qualified, and I don't mean qualified in terms of, your creative skill and passion and interest in the company. At the end of the day, that's what matters the most.
Yeah, it is about potential, really, and just how badly you want it. And nothing is ever handed to anyone, unfortunately.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. We have time for 2 more questions. One question that we received, I hope this person doesn't mind that I'm kind of paraphrasing the question a bit, but it sounds like they have a ton of experience and their expertise is pretty wide in the sense that it expands across a couple different disciplines. And it
Yeah,
sounds like sometimes potential employers feel like that myriad of skills is unfocused, but in reality, they're just so seasoned that they do have depth in multiple disciplines. Is there any like advice on how to reposition that, or maybe questions to ask yourself so that you can narrow down your disciplines to what's truly right for you?
Mm.
I kind of like it depends on the list of disciplines, right? Like if because they often bleed into each other, right? Like maybe you started off as a copywriter and then you became a creative director, right? And maybe in between you had another role, and they're all kind of related. But if you see, I may try to think of like you're a baker, and then like it feels like disconnected and maybe unfocused. If you're applying to a job, I think it's maybe filtering that list to the most important for that role. I don't know.
Yeah. And sometimes I understand hiring managers may not see the overqualification as an asset or the breadth of experience, but that's not everyone. It sounds like maybe this person keeps, hitting a wall, perhaps. So it is about maybe honing in on an organization that would value that breadth of experience. And also, as you mentioned, Jess, like picking something out, like staying focused on what it is, because if it's too much, like go narrow and deep is what I'm trying to say. I think
Right.
that's the best way.
Yes. And that's what I was probably trying to articulate as well, is it's okay to, because clearly after, I think about the two of us, right? I have marketing and strategy and biz dev and recruiting, but if I'm applying to like lead talent and creatively, like some of that is less relevant than other skills. So it's kind of figure out how do you best position yourself for each role. And it might be that all of your skills are applicable. It might not be.
Yeah.
It's figuring out what's the right narrative and story for you.
Thank you guys so much for that. Our last question is, what's your advice for young creatives who are just entering the job market? So people who are pivoting from students and interns to, full-time employees.
Can you repeat the last part? Sorry, cut out for a second.
Sure. What's your advice for young creatives who are just entering the job market? So a different kind of pivoting.
Yeah. Well, kudos to those that are just entering the job market. I think it's going back to the beginning of, what I said, before you start putting yourself out there or when you start getting the calls, be confident in your skills. Why do you feel qualified for this particular role that you're interested in? Be prepared to speak to it. Have examples that relate to the skills listed in the job description or the skills that you've been told about that an organization needs. Saying yes to temping and freelancing, and really the exposure, whether it's on Creatively, and recruiters do look at these platforms, Creatively, or your LinkedIn profile, which is probably still the #1 tool for recruiters in terms of looking at potential candidates. But go outside your network and really just say yes to everything, and really those connections and networking is so overused, but you do need to put yourself out there, because that opens doors. It definitely can lead to opportunities. And do your research on any organization that you are meeting with. Read press releases, not just the organization website, but read interviews with employees that are there. Look
If they're
up
public, company. I mean, maybe don't read the full investor deck, but like there's a lot of information there that could be helpful. And it will impress a recruiter if you've like, to be like,
Yeah.
if you've done your homework and you really know a lot about the company. It all, I think, comes back to the like our common theme here of just like passion and going after it and doing everything you can to learn about the company and learn about the skill that you're interested in.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much for all of this insight and knowledge. I know we're out of time, but are there any last words you guys would like to say to the community who tuned in?
Thank you as well. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much, guys. We'll go ahead and put up a hold screen, but if you guys have any further questions or want to leave a note for us to take a look at, feel free to do so in the chat. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Lizzie.
Thank you.